Now, in Double Trouble today, Stuart Maconie looks at the partnership that was Flanders and Swann, from their beginnings as writers for revue to success with their own performances.
'Twas on a Monday morning, the gas man came to call. The gas tap wouldn't turn, I wasn't getting gas at all. He tore out all the skirting boards to try and find the main, and I had to call a carpenter to put them back again.
I first heard Flanders and Swann in sort of ludicrously stereotypical style on a veranda in East Africa. There was a kind of time warp about them, even I think when they were singing. They were very much the last gasp of the pre-sort of establishment club comedy, that rather exquisitely fashioned, beautifully written, tongue-in-cheek 50s revue, of which I think they were absolute masters and tremendously inspirational.
'Twas on a Wednesday morning, the electrician came. He called me Mr. Sanderson, which isn't quite my name. He couldn't reach the fuse box without standing on the bin, and his foot went through a window, so I called the glazier in. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do.
The librettist and one half of the musical comedy duo Kit and the Widow, Kit Hesketh Harvey, on perhaps the best-loved of all musical comedy duos. Michael Flanders and Donald Swann forged an enduring partnership which spanned more than 2 decades, from the 1940s, when they wrote songs for revues, into the 50s and 60s, when they toured the world with their two-man shows At the Drop of a Hat and At the Drop of Another Hat, both characterised by the Flanders and Swann formula of witty and adroit lyrics, breezy music and amusing repartee.
May I introduce, at the piano, the very distinguished pianist, composer and linguist, the Enid Blyton of English light music, Donald Swann. I must be Michael Flanders, obviously. We write songs. I write the words, Swann here writes the music.
They came from different backgrounds. Swann was born in Llanelli, the child of East European émigrés. Flanders grew up in London. They first met, though, at Westminster School. Tony Benn, also a student there, remembers their first collaboration.
In 1940, during the Blitz, when the school had been evacuated and then was brought back to London thinking the war was over, this was just at the time the Blitz began, Michael and Donald laid on a show at the Rudolf Steiner Hall in Baker Street called Go To It. And I was a stagehand. It was advertised as the only show going on in London because all the theatres were closed.
Go To It was Michael's baby, and he played most of the parts, with Donald accompanying on piano. Michael Flanders had performing in his blood. His mother was a professional violinist, and his father had worked as an actor and theatre manager. But even this couldn't match the Swanns for exotic glamour. His mother was supposedly born on a camel. Donald's widow, Alison Smith.
Yes, Donald often appeared as being the quintessential Englishman, but in fact his parents were Russian. His father was brought up in an Anglo-Russian household in St. Petersburg. His mother's background was particularly exotic. She came from Azerbaijan and she was Muslim.
After school, both went up to Oxford, but had little to do with each other. Before long, though, their educations were interrupted by the outbreak of war. Donald registered as a conscientious objector and worked for a Quaker ambulance unit in Greece and Palestine. Michael joined the Navy and served on a destroyer. It was at this time that he contracted polio. Michael's daughter, Laura Flanders.
Well, we knew the basic outlines of the story, that he contracted it while he was in the service with the Navy. He believes in the Malta area, and the Navy at the time were not aware that there was rampant polio in the area. And with his first symptoms, they did not immediately send him for medical treatment. In fact, he was kept on his watch, on his shift of duty at that time. Many people afterwards, although not him, but many people afterwards said that if he had got treatment earlier, his paralysis could have been better contained. But I guess at that time, polio was really at least not the first thing on people's minds.
Michael Flanders was to be a wheelchair user for the rest of his life. After the war, Donald went back to university to finish his education. Michael convalesced at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, where he began to write in earnest, but wasn't allowed back to Oxford because of his disability. Michael had previously had designs on the acting life. Donald's ambition was to be a professional musician, and this was the catalyst of their partnership. Impresario Laurier Lister takes some of the credit too.
I think I can definitely say I discovered Donald Swann, because one day he wrote to me and asked if I would hear some of his music, and I was interested, and he was up at Oxford at the time, and I suggested he came down to Sanderstead where I was then living, and down he came, this bright little boy with sparkling eyes, and he played me some of the most enchanting music I had heard. I said to Donald, have you got anyone you could write lyrics with? And he said, yes, a friend of mine we did some numbers with at Oxford.
So I looked up Michael Flanders, he was an old school friend, and said, well, you write the words, I'll write the music. Here's this producer, he wants funny songs.
And he asked me whether I would like to write some lyrics with him. He remembered I'd done that sort of thing at school. And I did, and a lot of other people did as well, of course, part-time. He was a full-time music writer, shall we say, and then there were a lot of us who had other jobs. I was busy and active in radio and television at that time. And there were other people in other jobs who were writing as a jam on their bread and butter.
And that's how we started to write numbers for other people in reviews.
They were never really thinking of being performers as a double act at all.
Ian Wallace.
They were a double act who wrote songs for other people, for well-known review stars, people like Max Adrian and Rose Hill and lots of other people of that generation.
We wrote for these reviews a great many topical numbers, of course, and most of these don't have much meaning now, but one which, alas, has remained perennial is our little folk song for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the day, whoever he may be, as they dance round the stage in ever-increasing inflationary spirals. It was, I'm horrified to see, originally written for Winston Churchill and R.A.B. Butler, Reb, but we've recast it for you, and here it is.
There's a hole in my budget, dear Harold, dear Harold. There's a hole in my budget, dear Harold, my dear.
Then mend it, dear Healy, dear Dennis, dear Dennis. Then mend it, dear Chancellor, dear Dennis, my dear.
But how shall I mend it, dear Wilson, dear Wilson? But how shall I mend it, dear Wilson, my dear?
By building up exports, dear Dennis, dear Dennis. By increased production, dear Eyebrows, my dear.
Insert the names Blair and Brown and throw in the odd reference to fiscal prudence, and the observation is still relevant and amusing 40 years and countless chancellors on. Donald's musical aplomb, in combination with Michael's elegantly witty lyricism, was clearly a winning combination. Have Some Madeira, My Dear was not only a hit in English, but when translated into Dutch, became a chart topper in Holland too. Kit Hesketh Harvey is an admirer of their technical accomplishments.
I do remember from the very start being incredibly impressed by Flanders' lyric writing. I think the enduring craft of his writing has been overlooked, and I do think that he's one of, if not the best, one of the best English lyricists we've ever had. Astonishingly felicitous in his writing. I mean, uses of what an English lit crit would call zeugma in things like she lowered her standards by raising her glass, her courage, her eyes, and his hopes, which is when one verb is attached to all sorts of subsidiary actions.
I find writing extremely difficult. I have very little confidence in myself as a writer, as a slaving, slogging away, must have something ready by the week after next writer. I can only sit and wait that an idea comes to me that is happy and nice and full. 95% inspiration and only 5% perspiration, because I'm the slowest and I worry about commas and semicolons, and I was always told at school that I was a rotten writer, partly because I was left-handed and nobody could read what I did. Inevitably, though, when you're thinking of words, if the words happen to come first, and they often do, because after all the idea comes before even the words or the music, you will think of something in terms of an existing cadence at any rate. And if it comes dum, dum, da, 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 da. Nobody ever sat down and wrote a mud, a glorious mud. At least if they did, it wasn't me. Suddenly, for no reason, came into my head words and music going down to Brighton in the car. Mud, mud, glorious mud. And then Donald took it and illuminated it.
I like odd things, Richard. I think so did Michael. That's how he came to write these most extraordinary fantasies about animals.
A bony hippopotamus was standing one day on the banks of the cool Shalimar. He gazed at the bottom as it peacefully lay by the light of the evening star.
away on a hilltop sat combing her hair, his fair hippopotami maid. The hippopotamus was no ignoramus, and sang her this sweet serenade. Mud, mud, glorious mud, nothing quite like it for cooling the blood. So follow me, follow, down to the hollow, and there let us wallow in glorious mud.
Believe it or not, that song has even been heard above the click of the croquet balls and the pop of the Krug corks in the rarefied environs of Glyndebourne. The operatic baritone Ian Wallace had been looking for lighter music to sing and was introduced to Donald by a mutual friend. In his metaphorical back pocket, he had the hippopotamus song, and when Ian heard it, he loved it. He sang it to friends at Glyndebourne who loved it too, much to Swan's wry amusement. It was strange, he said, because we were real middlebrow people, though perhaps with highbrow taste. At this stage then, Michael and Donald were still largely writing songs for other people to perform in reviews like Penny Plain, Airs on a Shoestring and Pay the Piper, all of which, like the first, were directed by Laurier Lister and starring other performers such as Joyce Grenfell and Ian Wallace. Until one summer, when Flanders and Swan themselves were persuaded to emerge blinking from behind the safety curtain.
It wasn't until they went down, I think, to a summer school. They were invited down to a summer school at Dartington, and John Amis had said, "Why don't you sing us a whole lot of your songs on the sort of last Saturday of the summer school?"
We used to have a cabaret on Fridays.
John Amis.
And I always needed somebody to come and help put up music stands, take boiled eggs to the artists at tea time and all that kind of stuff. And I said to Donald, if you're not doing anything in August, would you like to come down? He came down, loved it. Then we had a girl also in the office with polio. And I thought, well, Donald's here, why don't we get Mike down? And we circularised all our London and home county people from the summer school. And bless their hearts, they turned up. Of course, they knew Flanders and Swan, so they knew what to expect, and they were all agog.
And they went down an absolute storm, the man in the wheelchair and this eager sort of, like an inky fag from school, you know, playing away with this great enthusiasm. And it sort of put it into their minds, I think, that perhaps instead of writing songs for other people, they could write them for themselves.
And it was such a wild success that everybody said, well, why don't you take a theatre and do it yourself as a show?
Now, Michael didn't believe that people would be able to watch a man in a wheelchair play, because he hadn't acted at all with his disability. But in fact, the fact that he's so able in the chair, and of course incredibly funny, surprised everybody and himself with it.
Inspired by their happy tryouts, they invited the splendidly named Frederick Piffard, theatre manager of the New Lindsay Theatre Club, to listen to some of their pieces.
He came to tea, and we played him half an hour's worth of numbers. Nice stuff, he said. Who's in it? Us, we said shyly. Well, you pay the bill, carry on, he said. It was £40 a week, and we took it for 2 weeks with an option on the third. The night we opened, New Year's Eve 1956, nothing else seems to have conflicted in the theatre, and not only did the Dartington people turn up in force, but the critics came too.
They invited their friends that they thought maybe they would be able to do a night's show or a couple of nights. They decided perhaps a week. They invited the people they knew. It was kind of a lark, was my impression, but it turned out to be far from a lark. It was 10 years of work.
All of a sudden, the bells began to ring. We'd been discovered. By the 10th day, Jack Minster was beseeching us to go to the Fortune Theatre for an 8-week season. We turned it down. Why interfere with Mike's broadcasting career? He'd done 1,000 broadcasts by then. By composing. Why halt it for a theatrical fluke? He had not quite lost his diffidence at appearing in a wheelchair on stage, and I was totally raw to it, kept dropping my lyrics onto the floor and laughing in the wrong places. After 2 sleepless nights, we agreed to go on.
And the rest is theatrical history. But before the show can go on, it needs to be written. Here, Flanders and Swan offer some penetrating insights into the mysteries of their craft.
Well, somebody has to bring in a large bag of peanuts.
It's a start.
And then we have to try and see whether the fragments of music or the fragments of words which we have cooked up or thought up or have come to the surface, whether they have any relevance to that particular day, you see. Because many of these songs are the product of in fact, years of gestation. I mean, the elephant.
You're waffling a bit again.
No, go on, then. You be more specific.
Well, it starts with an idea, of course, usually an idea expressed in words, because music doesn't really express ideas, express emotions. And then we get together our literary and musical associations with this idea, and they all gradually form into a number bit by bit. We do construct it, create it live at the piano, and writing it down comes after.
The jungle was giving a party, a post-hibernation ball. The ballroom was crowded with waltzing gazelles, gorillas and zebras and all.
Then we had a theory that you've got to play everything to the window cleaner or a relative. There is no song until the first audience comes in. So that was a time of alteration. And after that, the songs virtually remained set. But the script in between was very malleable. And that's what became the show as opposed to songwriting.
No one ever wants to court a warthog, though a warthog does her best. I've spent a lot of money for a warthog. I am kiss-proofed and prettily dressed.
Always had a hat stand. Donald always at the piano, smiling very, very shyly. Michael wheeling himself in, and then the hat stand. And that was all they needed. Absolutely nothing else. And that was what made it such a compelling show. You didn't require any gimmicks or special stage sets. You just felt, in a strange way, as if you'd been invited to their party.
Oh, they got on tremendously well together. Tremendously well.
Ian Wallace.
I mean, one of the things about the show were that Donald was played as the sort of one who was held down by this bearded figure who was, in the most gentle way possible, bullied him. And all the dialogue was sort of putting Donald down.
I think when you look at the shows,
Alison Smith,
you have this man who's in a sort of wheelchair, so seemingly more sort of incapacitated and vulnerable, but ultimately the stronger person. He holds the reins. He actually directs the whole show. And Donald was the butt of all his jokes. He's the fool guy. That's the term Donald used to express the dynamic between them. So on the one hand, Michael runs the whole show. Donald is sort of being teased and sort of butted throughout the whole thing. But another way, that's the comedy of it.
What I liked about them was that they were on the same wavelength as far as sense of humour was concerned. They both had immense energy. They could never have done what they did do without the energy. But I think Michael was the motivator, really. But he was marvellous at telling a story. Michael, like another animal song, begins called "The Warthog." The jungle was giving a party, a post-hibernation ball. The ballroom was crowded with waltzing gazelles, gorillas and zebras and all. It's immediately a marvellous picture is summed up. And working with people like that was a joy, absolute joy.
Did you have to dye your hair? If that's perfume, give me air. I strongly disapprove of scarlet teeth.
But let us take the floor.
'Cause I'm absolutely sure that you're a warthog,
just a warthog, the sweetest little, neatest little, dearest and completest little warthog underneath.
Michael Flanders had a theory that people would listen to home truths if they were illustrated via animals. He once told his wife Claudia to look at the text of The Warthog and she'd understand that he knew all about women. As a fitting testament, The Warthog was sung by Ian Wallace at Michael's funeral service. But however clever, by the 1960s, gentle reflections on the love life of the warthog could have seemed passé. The tenor of comedy in the 60s was hardening. Beyond the Fringe and the Establishment Club symbolised the new and more acerbic satirical humour. But Donald and Michael's quintessentially English delivery and affectionate mockery actually seemed to bridge the gap between the new and the old.
They sang these songs which were satirical and up-to-date sort of comments on current events. But there was no malice. It was wonderful. They hit their targets with tremendous bang in the middle, but it wasn't sort of in-your-face type of thing at all. It was hard-hitting, but it was gentle. That sounds a contradiction in terms, but that's really what it was.
The sort of early satire David Frost did and all that related to the day's events, whereas the satire that Michael and Donald did related to the human condition, which doesn't change. So in that sense, I think it had a permanence about it.
For all their genteel appearance, Flanders and Swan had become veterans of a touring schedule that would make the average rock band blanch. In 1959, the duo performed their first fully-fledged revue of their own, at the drop of a hat, at the New Lindsay Theatre in Notting Hill Gate. After 3 weeks, the show was moved to the Fortune Theatre in the West End, where it ran for over 2 years and 750 performances. During this run, the performance was recorded by fifth Beatle, though he didn't know it then, George Martin. And just as it would for the Beatles, America beckoned for Flanders and Swan. 1959 saw their Broadway debut and a subsequent mammoth tour of the US and Canada, then a tour of Switzerland and the recording of their first studio album, The Bestiary of Flanders and Swan. After another British tour, their second revue opened at the Haymarket Theatre in 1963. At the drop of another hat, ran for almost a year and was taken on tour to Australia, New Zealand and America. These global triumphs were proof not just of the quality of Flanders and Swan's material, but of the painstaking research and diligence that Michael Flanders put in before he committed a word to paper.
A friend here from outer space and I, we like to go down to the Natural History Museum from time to time, check up on these animals you write about. Every so often he comes over to Kensington, which is a great treat for him, of course. I give him lunch. After lunch he takes me to the museum, which is his treat. Last time I was there, I discovered it was free. Also, last time we were there, we noticed something we'd never spotted before. Near the entrance, there's a glass case, and in this glass case are described the habits of certain climbing plants. Now, this may seem a rather strange subject for a song, but we have written what is perhaps a rather strange song. Anyway, it's called Misalliance.
The fragrant honeysuckle spirals clockwise to the sun, and many other creepers do the same. But some climb anti-clockwise, the bindweed does for one, or convolvulus, to give her proper name. Rooted on either side a door, wherever each species grew, and raced towards the window ledge above. Each corkscrew to the lintel in the only way it knew, where they stopped, touched tendrils, smiled, and fell in love. Said the right-handed honeysuckle to the left-handed bindweed, oh, let us get married in our parents' don't mind. We'd be loving and inseparable, inextricably entwined. We'd live happily ever after, said a honeysuckle to the bindweed. To the honeysuckle's parents it came as a shock. The bindweeds, they cried, are in furious talk. They're uncultivated, of breeding bereft. We twine to the right, and they twine to the left.
Misalliance, with a typically subtle but radical message woven in there amongst the tripping melodies and very proper singing style. Flanders and Swan now seem to belong to a kinder realm of British comedy, and like the pre-beaching branch lines that they eulogise brilliantly in one of their most evocative songs, Flanders and Swan belonged to another England, and after 1,700 performances, they were running out of steam.
Millersdale for Tideswell, Kirby Muxloe, Malcop and Scholar Green.
Michael and Donald have been playing together for about 11 years. OK, the music changed, the links were different from night to night. They introduced new material, but essentially the format was the same. Michael in the wheelchair introducing the numbers, Donald at the piano. And I think if you're repeating that formula and you're touring it, it gets pretty exhausting after a while. One could say that Michael wanted to continue it because I think he felt that show gave him life. I think he even said it was good for his lungs. It exercised his lungs. It was healthy. It kept him going. For Donald, I think it was more of a straitjacket because he was bursting to do other types of music.
I'll travel no more from Littleton Badsy to open shore. At Long Stanton I'll stand well clear of the doors no more.
Well, I was getting very keen on ideas in my own mind and feeling I could put them into music. Religious ideas, songs from foreign countries. I wanted to see all sorts of I wanted to work with women, you know. I wanted to work with different voices. So there were tensions of that type, and then we had been very much accepted by the Americans, and it raised the whole question of are we going to live in America or are we going to come back? And once we came back, it seemed as though we couldn't restore that magic again, not between us. We were friends, but somehow the continuous nature of the show just suddenly faded.
No one departs, no one arrives. From Selby to Goole, from St. Earth to St. Ives, they've all passed out of our lives on the slow train.
I think my father was frustrated in a sense. I think he would have preferred to have carried on performing. Donald had a family life and a composing life. He wanted to take in other directions. It was a sad division, I think, a sad split, but not acrimonious.
It was very difficult for Michael because he went into broadcasting and had a successful career there, but it was nothing as compared with this wonderful contact with the live audience, which I think that's the essence of a double act too, that the chemistry between the people is apparent to the audience. There's a relationship there which, apart altogether from the comedy they're doing, the audience are thinking of them with affection because obviously they are friends, you know.
On the slow train, Cockermouth for Buttermere. On the slow train, Armley Moor, Aram, Pie Hill and Summercoats. On the slow train, Windmill End.
Double Trouble is presented by Stuart Maconie and produced in Manchester by Angela Sherwin. And next week, Stuart explores the partnership of Peter Cook and Dudley Moore.